The Edmonton Oilers have gotten a pleasant surprise in the form of the production of Jack Roslovic. The Oilers still shouldn't sign him to a long-term deal.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. This is my 10th season doing digital hockey content, my third as a host here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. On today's show, we will discuss the merits of a potential Jack Roslovic extension through a few different lenses. We will start out with talking about Roslovic's career trajectory to this point, why he is the player he is, how he got here. In our second segment, we'll pivot to talking about the underlying production, what type of player he is, what he's good at. And then in our final segment, I will make the case as to why, even though Rosslovic has been a pleasant surprise and a good player for the Oilers this year, I don't think he's going to be worth whatever extension he's offered before July 1st. So to start out, when it comes to player evaluation, there are a lot of different ways to go about building your baseline. And for me, I am biased to some degree to a player's pedigree. Where did they play their amateur hockey? Were they a junior player, a college hockey player, a European player, a Russian player? Did they go to the OHL? Were they in a junior league as an overager, as a 19-year-old? Did they go to the AHL at 20? Did they go directly to the NHL after being drafted? Were they a U.S. National Development Team program player? And when we talk about someone like Rosslovic, a 25th overall pick 11 years ago, 2015 draft class, which is crazy. That's 11 years ago. I feel ancient. The famed McDavid, Eichel, Mitch Marner draft class that has fundamentally shaken up the league, and I would argue probably the most important draft class of the 21st century. Roslovic's trajectory to get to the present day is really interesting because as a first-round pick of an organization like the Jets, who historically have given their guys a very slow runway to building them up to be NHLers, he hasn't really gotten where you would want. And what I mean by that, when you draft a guy first round, 25th overall, that means you were a pretty good team in the regular season to be picking 25th overall. The Jets in the 2010s were a decent hockey team. They had a couple of really nice iterations. Of course, that 2018 team that lost to Nashville, that's one of my favorite teams of all time to not win the Stanley Cup. But Rosslovic's a player who really got brought along slowly. 2 AHL seasons after 1 cup of coffee in college hockey. That's what's weird about it. So Rosslovic plays 2 years for the National Development Team program. He plays 1 year of college hockey after being drafted by the Jets. He goes to the AHL on and off for 2 years. He goes up to the NHL for a cup of coffee at the end of the 16-17 season. He goes back and forth between the two in 17-18. Then in 2018-2019, he plays a full season, 77 regular season games, but he only plays 9:45 per game, all situations, not just even strength, only 9:45 per game. And that tells you just where he was in the pecking order. And I think ultimately, when it comes to Rosslovic, he's been a victim of not having a lot of equity wherever he's been. Even in Winnipeg, an organization that is really dependent on developing its players internally or the players it acquires in trades because it's challenging for them to sign marquee free agents. Even in Winnipeg, Rosslovic had a hard time breaking through with Mark Scheifele firmly ahead of him and Andrew Kopp firmly ahead of him in the early stages of his career. There wasn't really a path to getting Rosslovic top 6 minutes. And ultimately, when it comes to production and it comes to building confidence for young players, they need ice time. The single biggest indicator of a player's confidence is how engaged they are. Are they in the mix? Are they touching the puck a lot? And you don't have to be getting shots on goal. You don't have to be setting up goals. Are you in the mix? Are you engaged? Are you putting passes where they need to? Are you making plays for your teammates? Are you winning loose pucks? A guy who goes a whole period without being noticed once as a young player, that's a little concerning. And something I find ironic is Rosslovic is an extremely confident player. you watch him make decisions out there, and I said this when they united him with Ike Howard last week. I really like that both those guys want the puck on their stick and they want to make plays. That is an infectious attitude. And look, someone like Rosslovic, who probably isn't having the career he thought he would, at least from a longevity standpoint with one team, maybe becoming a bit more of a core piece, to still have that shoot first, get me the puck, I'll make a play mentality, that says something about him as a player and the confidence he has in himself. That's important. And I talk about it all the time, that relationship between confidence and production, because a guy who feels good about his game is always going to be able to make more plays. Because when you're feeling good about your game, you're going to make riskier decisions because you think you can pull them off. And for Rosslovic, he's in a weird spot in Winnipeg where, like we said, there are two centers ahead of him in the pecking order. You could throw Adam Lowry in there as well. And ultimately, you're left curious as to how a player like this breaks through. And the reason I cite those two is because earlier in his career, Rosslovic was playing center. And the Jets have had a really nice crop of forwards for a little while now. And when you are a young guy, teams like the Jets that are perpetually trying to make the playoffs, even if they don't have a cup trajectory, they want to make the playoffs because that playoff revenue is integral. They need to keep their fan base engaged. And by being the 8 seed, the 7 seed, you are at least keeping your fans tertiarily, which is a word I just made up, I think. I'm pretty sure that's not a word. At least tangentially, that's a word. Tangentially invested in your team. And ultimately, Rosslovic gets traded to the Blue Jackets with Patrick Laine for Pierre-Luc Dubois. In Columbus, where he is from, Jack Roslovic is originally born in Columbus, Ohio. This is a good hockey player who has two really good traits. He has a very hard shot, and he's an above-average skater. Those traits will get you in the league. He was a first-round pick for a reason. The U.S. national development team in the USHL, those stats are kind of hard to judge because the infrastructure for the development team is so different from what the other USHL teams have. But 38 points in 25 games is nothing to sneeze at. And then 1 year at Miami of Ohio, 26 points in 36 college games at a lower level, not the Big Ten. That's definitely something worth talking about. I want to see a guy like this get opportunities. And I said this when the Oilers signed Jack Roslovic at the time. This skill set is very reminiscent of what Jeff Skinner has. This is the type of player who cannot drive a line by himself. He is not individually talented enough as a playmaker, as a skater, as a shooter to make their own offense. But you put a guy like this alongside a more talented player, he's a conduit. He can effectively channel that energy and put his team in a better position. I want to see a guy like this in a supplementary role. Now, he's played some playoff hockey. He got him with Carolina. He got him with the Jets a couple times. He was a trade deadline addition for the Rangers the year they won the President's Trophy. But ultimately, through the first 9-10 years of his NHL career, Roslovic's resume screams out a guy that has not built a lot of equity anywhere. And we talk about that from time to time when it comes to opportunities, because teams that give players a lot of money are invested in them. They have put equity into said players, so there's more of an impetus to give them opportunities to figure it out. Someone like Rosslovic, who's never really had a gaudy counting stats year, has been in the RFA trenches for a while now, has never really had the organizational equity to command the consistent top 6 role on a good team, to command first power play time, and that's always going to cut into what you could potentially do. So with all of that said as our primer to establish what type of player Rosslovic is, we are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we will dive into the underlying numbers, including NHL edge stats, transition stats, and of course, what the shot metrics say right after this. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important it is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire a co-host or a producer, I'd go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I need. Your experience, the software you know how to use, and most importantly, how much hockey you know. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs help your listing stand out and get priority placement. Sponsored jobs boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs directly get 90% more hires than those non-sponsored. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. Thank you so much to everybody that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every single day. And if you're an everydayer, you got to check out the Everydayer Club. The details are down in the show notes, and you can get access to the Everydayers Discord server where you can talk to other everydayers like you about your favorite teams. So as we continue our Rosslovic conversation, I do want to emphasize that every team, especially good ones, need complementary supporting pieces, and the better your depth is, the better your team's going to be. I think if you're a legitimate Stanley Cup contender and a player like Rosslovic, who's really fast and has got a hard shot, is on your third line, and you have the complementary pieces to have a skill third line, I think you're in really good shape. And Roslovic's skill set doesn't translate exactly how the hockey men like it. And that's part of why he's never going to probably become a superstar. His skills, his traits are solid. I would venture to say Rosslovic is a high-end skater. He's 83rd percentile for top speed. He's slightly above average for shot velocity. This is a pretty gifted player when it comes to the raw tools. And when a player has the traits, when they have the skill, but the production doesn't necessarily follow, that tells you a few things. Number one, it probably tells you not great environment. So when you go and look at the underlying numbers in terms of shots, scoring chances, expected goals, this is a guy who's been negative pretty much for his career. So on average for his career, 49% of the scoring chance attempts, 48% of the shots on goal, 45% of the goals, 46% of the expected goals on 8.08 shooting, which is a little low, and then 908 saves. So this is a player who, from a metrics perspective, isn't controlling play. And that really supports our overarching view of this player. This is someone who I would call a flash player. He's not somebody who's going to win a lot of loose pucks. He's not somebody who's going to throw a big hit on the forecheck. Where Rosslovic is at his best is off of the rush. This is a player with elite foot speed who, if you can get him off and running, and that's the challenge, especially because he's probably not going to be out there by virtue of being on the third line. He's probably not going to be out there with your best puck-moving defenseman in Evan Bouchard. Now, maybe as you get Walman reintegrated and that second pair gets a little smoother, maybe you find ways to balance out the distribution of Walman minutes between the Draisaitl line and whatever line Rosslovic ends up on, likely the third with Savoy and at least temporarily with Howard or with Curtis Lazar or whomsoever you want to throw on that spot. It's going to be a challenge to put Rosslovic in his best possible position. And this ties back to the idea of what we were talking about before when it comes to equity within the team. Now, the Oilers don't have a lot committed to Rosslovic right now. And we'll talk about it more in our final segment, which is why he's been valuable, why this has been a good signing. But the Oilers don't have a lot of skin in the game as far as Rosslovic goes. Now, they signed him to an extension before the end of the season. Then we have a different conversation about what it means for a guy to sign that long-term deal and how you go about managing that. But for the Oilers, where they're at right now, Rosslovic is not higher in the pecking order than Connor or Leon, than Hyman, than Nugent-Hopkins, or Podkolzin. At least for right now, Kasperi Kapanen is ahead of him in the pecking order. I think it's fair to say Matthew Savoy, by virtue of being a younger player who needs more time and can do more things, he's probably higher in the pecking order. And then you're really boxed in if you're Rosslovic because you don't have a lot of lineup spots. And we could see a situation like we did last year. And I don't think we'll see Rosslovic get healthy bombed if everyone's healthy and it's just purely Chris Knobloch's decision. I don't think that's the case. I think his traits are a little more tantalizing. He's a little bit younger than Jeff Skinner was. I think there's a little bit more meat on the bone there to chew, for lack of a better expression. But when I think about Rosslovic, I think about transition, and the underlying numbers really do support that. And you can get by in this league by being a flash player where you make the occasional exciting, flashy play, but you're always going to be capped off by the perception of you as not being a heart and soul kind of guy. And again, I really think that's the case here. I think Rosslovic has really good traits, and I think the underlying numbers support this idea of a player who, when you can get him off the rush, when you can counterattack, he's going to be at his best because he's going to get defensemen who are on their heels, who are back skating. You skate faster forwards than you can backwards. You get those clean breakouts, and I think that's at least in part why him and Leon were able to ride such a shooting bender at the start of the season together, and why Rosslovic was cooking to the degree he was. Now, the underlying numbers, he's negative on the year in goal share. He's negative on the year in expected goals and in high danger chances as an Oiler. But through the first month, prior to Rosslovic getting hurt, he was almost at a point per game. He was at something like 18 points in 22 games as an Oiler. And this is somebody whose career high in points in a season is like 50, if I remember correctly. And, oh no, it's only 39. 44. Roslovic's career high in points as a player was 43 in 2022-2023, his second to last season with the Blue Jackets. And that's a player who's not on a first power play or is on a very bad first power play when you're capped out at 40 points. And I want a guy like this on my team. I think the traits are very valuable. I think in a depth role, he can really help you. Now, is he going to embrace the mentality of being a depth player with the attitude he has? And look, I say that complimentary. I want guys like this who want the puck on their stick, who want to make plays, who want to take shots. I don't want guys scared of the puck. I don't want the kids on my team in Little League who don't want the ball hit at them. I want people who play with a lot of confidence, and I think Rosslovic, playing with Savoy and Howard to some degree, has implemented that. And then when you look at things like his all-three zone, his transition data, he's not creating a ton of shots for himself. Scoring chances that don't become shots are ones that get blocked, and I think those are a lot of the perimeter shots that are of low quality, low danger. He creates a lot of high-danger passes, which that's encouraging. If he's playing with Leon, you want Leon taking those shots before him. He's above average in the rate of shots he gets off of the forecheck, scoring chances, he gets off of both the forecheck and the rush, but I do think that's largely a byproduct of playing so much with Leon. And frankly, the fact that both Leon and Rosslovic are above average players at carrying the puck into the offensive zone with possession and maintaining control through transition, I think that opens up a lot of doors for what that line can do, especially with Podkolzin, who's such a good complementary piece. And I understand why Chris Knobloch has gone back to Kasperi Kapanen since Kapanen's come back from that lower body injury. But at the same time, I don't think you're going to be able to get by long-term with those types of players on a Draisaitl line. You're going to need more goal scoring, and we know the Oilers are up against the salary cap and are going to struggle to add an Alex Tuch and Artemi Panarin type player, short of managing to trade Darnell Nurse the other way. And the Oilers have reportedly not asked Darnell Nurse to trade for if he would be willing to be traded, if you want to believe what Nurse himself has said versus what some insiders, I think it was Elliot Friedman over the summer, had said. The Oilers checked in on both Henrique and Nurse if they would be willing to be traded, which Friedman said no, obviously, but Nurse refuted that he'd even been asked. So you could take that for what it's worth. And then last note, these are supplementary type players. This is not a guy you need to put a ton of equity in. And it hurts the trajectory of their careers because they don't get on to first power plays or first lines. They usually don't get to play with your team's best players, but they have plus traits. And that's what keeps a guy like Rosslovic in the NHL long term. Being a fast skater and having a hard shot will keep you around. Even if you have deficiencies, even if you have holes, you will keep getting signed. Even if you got to take the one-year deals with bad teams, the way John Klingberg and Jeff Skinner have, you stay in the league, and then maybe you hope you have a good first half in a bigger role on a bad team and you get traded at the deadline, and then you have a chance to play for a Stanley Cup down the road. But Rosslovic, as a supporting cast member, is pretty solid. We're going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, and I'm going to tell you why, in spite of the fact that I've been pretty adamant that this is a good hockey player with a lot of utility, I don't think the Oilers should invest in him long term. The NFL playoffs are rolling and FanDuel is in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts you can apply to the bets you like the most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply. The boosts let you lean into your game day instincts. Whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching, the boosts give you more juice on the bet you already like instead of forcing you to bet something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bet feel that way too. You make your picks and apply your boosts to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs are rolling. It's a really good slate this weekend. We get the ball rolling Saturday afternoon, the Bills at the Broncos. Saturday night, the 49ers, no Kittle, no Ayuk, Debo on the Commanders, no Fred Warner, no Nick Bosa. Big underdogs against the number one seed. Then Sunday, D'Amico Ryans goes up to New England with CJ Stroud to take on the Pats. And then rounding out the divisional round, the Rams heading to what is supposed to be a very, very cold Chicago to take on the Bears. Visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL game day. Thank you so much to everybody that is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. We'll have our normal episode for you tomorrow after tonight's game against the Islanders. And look, this is one of my deficiencies as a hockey analyst. I never want to sign anyone long-term. I think liquidity and flexibility are the two most underrated components of roster construction. You do not need to marry yourself to the majority of your team. You have your foundational pieces, and you're in a window of contention like the Oilers are. You got the two franchise centers. You got the number one defenseman. You've got an elite goal scorer in Hyman. You've got an okay, at this point, complimentary defender in Matthias Ekholm. You've got a plus second pair defenseman in Jake Wallman. Nuge is floating around a point per game. He's riding a really hot streak by virtue of playing so much with McDavid and getting on that really hot first power play. But the bones of a good team are here. And Stan Bowman has spent much of his 2 years at the helm trying to figure out the exact right permutation of the supporting cast. And the thing when it comes to supporting cast members, there is a reason they are not on other teams' first or second lines or power plays, and in most cases, not their penalty kills. Those supporting cast guys who sign the 2 and 3 year deals every offseason, who have to linger into mid-July, they don't sign on July 1st. But they're there every year or every 2 years because their skill set has value, especially to a good team's depth. But the problem becomes, especially when you're a team trying to stay competitive, you don't know when the cliff is coming. When it comes to a superstar player, a Connor, a Leon, you can assume they are going to be able to stave off the aging curve a little bit longer than your average NHL player because a guy like Connor or Leon is starting at such a high peak, they have more room for a gradual decline. You look at the season Sidney Crosby's having right now in Pittsburgh, and yes, he's one of the 5 greatest players ever. I think you can pencil Connor in for a very graceful 30s, who very well, if he wants to, could probably play into his 40s should he be interested in pursuing that type of longevity. But the supporting cast guys are not putting up 120-point seasons as 26-year-olds so that they can put up 70-pointers when they're 33 or 4. That's just not the way the world works. And a lot of time, especially the more grinder types, and Rosslovic this doesn't apply to him, but you look at a Trent Frederick, you look at the Barclay Goodrow contract the Rangers signed, you look at the contract Tanner Jeannot signed with Boston, those types of guys who don't provide value with their offense because they're not goal scorers, they're not distributors, and are largely dependent on defense and forechecking, those contracts always age terribly. Because you don't have a high floor for offense, your value entirely comes from defense. And what's the first thing that goes as you get older? You lose your speed. And when you're not as fast, when you're not as durable, and you just don't have as much energy, you got to prioritize which end of the rink you want to put your work into. And if you are consistently losing foot races and you are spending a majority of the time in your own end, you're going to have a hard time making much happen for yourself offensively. And that's the trick here. Rosslovic at 28 is not encroaching on his cliff. I think Jack Roslovic, from a skills perspective, should be fine for another 2 or 3 years. I think Anything beyond that is a bit silly for a guy whose career high in goals in a season is 22. Yes, he's hit that number twice, but those are the outliers. This is a guy who's probably going to give you somewhere between 15 to 25 goals, depending on the year. I think more often than not, he's going to settle in right around 13 or 14. And if he gets a little hot, the way he did at the start of this year, maybe that number's closer to 20. But more likely than not, this guy's going to be outside of your top six. And when you have to play a guy who is not a top six forward, who is not a power play guy, you end up stuck with a bad contract because they are never, ever going to be able to provide the type of value they need long term. Without those counting stats, all of these contracts look rough. We were talking about it the other day with Darnell Nurse. He was never going to live up to the contract cost because Evan Bouchard jumped him in the pecking order. As a defenseman, if you are not the number one power play quarterback, your value to your team from a dollars and cents standpoint is always going to be stunted. For Rosslovic, who's not on a first power play unit, who right now is not playing with McDavid or Draisaitl, his counting stats are going to take a real dive. His metrics are not very good. He is not going to be able to outplay his environment in the way a Connor or a Leon can. You know, that's one of the conversations in the greater hockey community about Macklin Celebrini right now. He is playing out of his mind from a counting stats perspective. They are putting up a ton of goals and assists in his minutes, but the Sharks are conceding more scoring chances, high danger chances, and expected goals than he's creating. But he is so individually talented, he is able to play above those metrics for an extended period of time. Rosslovic is not. The Oilers are not going to be able to sustain having a third line that's underwater from a possession metric standpoint or from just a raw goal scoring metric. We talked about it a few weeks ago. There was the point in the season where the Oilers, without McDavid and Draisaitl on the ice, had been outscored 44-19. I'm going to pull it up real quick and check right now just because I was curious how it's changed in the last week. But you think about it purely from a offense and a value standpoint. He's not getting ahead of Hyman in the pecking order. He's not getting ahead of Nuge. He's probably not getting above Podkolzin. He could hypothetically get ahead of Kapanen, but we have seen him and Leon get outshot. And on the year, just for the record, the Oilers have been outscored 50-20 without Connor or Leon on the ice, at least one of them. And that falls on the Roslovics, the Henriques, the Ike Howards, the Matthew Savoys. The Oilers need more guys. The Oilers are at least one or two forwards short from an even strength perspective. Now, they don't have the cap space to go out and get one. And frankly, even if Rosslovic is amenable to a short-term deal, 2 or 3 years, I still don't really want to give a guy like this $5 or $6 million a year because he's not going to be worth it. And look, I know I need to recalibrate my salary cap math in my brain for this increased salary cap or what a player's worth based on their production. My old gold standard of $1 million per 10 points and then 1.5 for every 10 goals. It doesn't really work in this environment anymore because that was based on such a flat environment where any type of offense was going to be at a premium. And now a guy like Rosslovic, I would argue, is probably better off bouncing from contender to contender if he cares about winning. Now, if he's looking for long-term security and the Oilers are willing to offer it, he should take it 100%. But if you're a guy like this, if you're the Skinner, the Klingberg, if you're Connor Brown, and look, I know Connor Brown's on a different level of player. He's more of a penalty kill and depth and speed guy. But if you're that type of guy who has a very specialized skill set, who's really good at one or two components of the game, and you're ring hunting, don't sign somewhere long-term. Bounce around, give yourself a best chance year to year. And if you're the Oilers, don't get too romantic about a nice shooting streak, a nice hot streak early in the year. See how the rest of the season goes now that he's come back from that lower body injury. See if him, Savoy, and Howard spur anything, and we go from there. Don't get too excited over short-term sample sizes. We already are learning the lesson of that when it comes to Trent Frederick. Thank you so much to everybody who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your team covered every single day. And Locked On is now the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out the Everydayer Club where you can get access to ad-free episodes of your favorite podcasts on your preferred podcasting platform. If you are listening on audio, thank you so much for making us your first listen. Go check out Locked On NHL Game Night for your second. And if you are watching over on YouTube, we send you to the first ever national Locked On 24/7 YouTube channel. I will talk to you guys tomorrow after the Islander game, and I look forward to saying Oilers when I mean Islanders and Islanders when I mean Oilers on tomorrow's show, more than I've looked forward to anything in a while. I will see you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers.